Call to order the Public Works Finance and Safety Committee meeting of Monday, December 16, 2019. And the first item on the agenda is approval of the consent agenda. I have a motion by Manti and a second by Y. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Item number 2 is public input. Is there anyone here who would like to speak? Seeing none, we'll move on. Item number 3 is approval of the agenda, and I believe we're pulling item 4. Is that correct? All right, so with that change,
Motion to approve.
have a motion by Lallam and a second by Bueller. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Item 5 is council consideration of construction change order number 1, final, with J&J Earthworks, Inc. for the 3rd Avenue Southwest drainage improvements, project number 1910, for an increase of $14,982.55.
Motion to approve.
I have a motion by Lallam and a second by Manti. And with that, I would like Heath Von Eye to tell us about this.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. This change order does pertain to the 3rd Avenue Southwest project. We're calling it a drainage improvements project because that was one of the primary focuses of this reconstruction of that street and curb and gutter. But there were also other intrinsic benefits, obviously, when we reconstruct the full street, aside from just the drainage component. However, you know, this is a section of 3rd Avenue between 3rd Street Southwest to 2nd Street Southwest, one full block. The project had, as I mentioned, some curb and gutter, base course, paving, some new concrete sidewalk, some new approach pavement, and some storm sewer. The work has been complete, and the change order before you this evening is final quantities adjustments that were made throughout the construction and the progression of the work. And staff recommends approval based on these final quantities and the amount that's before you at just under $15,000. I'd be glad to help answer any questions.
Any questions, Council? Councilman Vilhauer?
Heath, of that 15,000, how much? Well, I say additional work to add 6 inches of millings. I mean, was that the primary driver of the increase here?
Yes, thank you, Councilman Vilhauer. I was just looking at the spreadsheet that I apologize is not one of the attachments on here, and I see Vanessa from IDG is also with us tonight. She was the consultant working with us on this project. And according to the spreadsheet, and Vanessa could confirm this for me, but that is one of the main components that added about, actually that was for the asphalt concrete, added about $7,000 for the asphalt. Trying to find another outlier here. And Vanessa, if you know those numbers off the top of your head, please feel free to enlighten us further.
Thank you, Heath. Vanessa Victor with Infrastructure Design Group. We did the design and construction administration for this project. Due to the time is of the essence, and we wanted to fix some of the drainage concerns that the neighborhood was having. We did not do soil borings like we generally do when we do a roadway reconstruct. So when it came to this project, we were anticipating using a lot of the existing base course underneath the roadway that was not there. So it was a change order after the fact. The majority of those costs are actually from the actual millings, where the city did provide the millings, but J&J had to go out and transport them to site. And then additionally, there was a couple of outliers, basically approaches to people's homes that they weren't using, that they would like removed. Basically a double connection off of the sidewalk that didn't seem prudent. So a couple of more concrete removals, and then fixing a driveway approach.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, I'll look for action. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Thank you. Item number 6 is council consideration of construction change order number 1 final with Creststone Builders, Inc. for the downtown alley reconstruction project number 1907 for an increase of $543.39.
Motion to approve.
I have a motion by Lallam and a second by Roby. And Heath, will you tell us about this one, please?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This is our annual alley improvements project for the downtown area, where we've been reconstructing and repaving old existing paved alleys throughout the downtown alley network. Now, this project kind of had to do a lot of adjustments this year. We originally had programmed a T-alley between First Avenue North and Kemp Avenue. That's between 3rd Street East and 4th Street East. Due to the potential for some adjacent future construction projects that could impact that alley and require it to be removed again, we felt it was prudent not to proceed with repaving that alley and instead reprogrammed these locations downtown to a couple other sites. That work has now progressed and been completed. We've worked with the contractor. They've been very amicable to adjust the locations and still honor their bid pricing. And so that was very helpful for us to proceed and still get some alleys repaved in the downtown area. And this change order before you, again, is for final adjustment of quantities and adjusting any additional bid tab quantities that were change ordered into the project. There was some additional geotextile fabric that was added as a new bid item, and then some concrete blanketing that had to occur because of the cold weather placements, and then some change orders for rebar as well. But there was also some project savings, so the net effect of this change order is a nominal amount of $543.39. And we, again, would entertain any questions the council might have.
Thank you. Council, any questions? Councilman Hoyer?
Heath, I just want to verify, this was already a previously paved alley. We just reconstructed it, just maintenance on it, or did we upgrade it in any way?
That is correct. Both these locations that we ended up paving were repaved from previously paved conditions that have been diminished and needed to be repaved.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Vilhauer?
Heath, how was the one alley that was done obviously is not downtown. How was that alley selected, or where? I can see where it is in the map, but what's the story as to how that alley was selected?
That's a great question. Thank you for pointing that out, Councilman Vilhauer, because that one came into the mix between discussions with the street superintendent, the assistant city engineer, and the sheer degradation that alley had incurred. Our city street crews do maintain that alley, and because of the condition it was in, it was becoming very, very difficult for them to keep it maintained and passable, even for our maintenance equipment, let alone the general public and the users adjacent to that alley that used it on a daily basis. So we did program that one in, even though it was outside the direct boundaries of the downtown area, and included that in the alley repaving program for those reasons. I would say, long story short, is it ranked very high on the need for having some corrections made to it, and so we allocated those funds from this project towards that alley.
Thank you.
Any other questions, council? All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Oh, yes, Councilman Vilhauer?
As long as we're talking alleys, can somebody, where are we at with our alley street committee that we put together here a few weeks ago? Any updates to report on that, or?
Heath, would you like to give an update?
Yeah, certainly. So that committee has met and talked through some of the history and the information that we have on hand regarding the downtown alley paving project and initiative that had begun some years ago now. We talked about how it was kind of an incubated idea from the Urban Renewal District board at that time, and progressed up to the council level, where the council agreed to move forward with a downtown alley pavement project. So it was really a lot of information sharing and getting everybody in that committee on the same wavelength of what the history of this project was. And from here, we were doing a little bit additional homework, doing a little bit more research on what that history exactly included, looking at some Urban Renewal Board minutes and things of that nature that might help steer the discussion on what the original intent was of this project or this initiative. And we're going to bring that information forward. Staff will bring that information forward again to this committee and continue to talk through it and find a clear directive in which to move forward in.
And we're also looking at streets as well as alleys, unpaved streets. I thought that was kind of the charge too, that we'd be looking at streets as well as alleys. Okay.
Yes, you are correct. We did look at that information as well, and it's definitely part of the discussion when we're talking about unpaved streets or alleys throughout town.
All right. Moving on, item 7 is presentation of Lake Compesca Master Plan by Confluence and Infrastructure Design Group, Inc. And I believe we're looking for a recommendation for approval.
Second.
Motion by Vilhauer and a second by Lallam. And we have John and Vanessa here. I'll let you guys just take it.
Okay, good afternoon, Council. Sorry. Newbie at the Watertown Council Chambers. My name is John Jacobson with Confluence. Obviously with me is Vanessa Victor from Infrastructure Design Group. We were part of the consulting team hired to put this plan together for you. Also in conjunction with our team was another engineering firm, AE2S, based out of South Dakota and North Dakota, and Dr. Brian Greb, who is our fisheries expert. So between those 4 groups, we assembled this plan. So as we go through it, feel free to throw your hand up, interrupt me, ask a question as we're going. We'd be happy to talk about different parts. That way nothing slips your mind by the time we get to the end of our presentation. And Vanessa and I will try hard to answer your questions that you may have. So this presentation here, going to run through the overview, our public input results, our analysis and recommendations, our the land use and planning and zoning work that we went through, and the ultimate implement plan that we have. So the overall purpose for the Lake Compesca Master Plan was to build upon prior upstream lake improvement efforts that have been happening over the last couple decades, along with, in conjunction with other planning that's been done for the lake. Obviously, our primary focus was on water quality improvements within the lake, and then help guide future development and land use. This diagram shows you kind of our general study area, showing the city limits are in red along Compesca, and our general border that we were working within. So we went through a number of different public feedback sessions. An important part of the RFP was to work with the public, both around Lake Compesca and within the community itself. So we did that in a number of open houses and through a survey that we sent out. The first open house was in June of 2018. We had over 100 plus attendees. We created a community survey and feedback form that summer, and we got over 526 surveys back. And then we had another open house in the December of that year. So a number of the things that we do to help people, besides just discussion points, is assemble kind of what we call a visual preference exercise. Sometimes people find visual images a little bit more stimulating for feedback and conversation than they do just us talking about different proposals and things to see. So as part of that, they're able to go up, and we have a series of boards where they can go up to and put dots on images they like, ones that they don't like, which oftentimes isn't so much just about the image itself, because you can look at things in any one image and see things you like or don't like, but it really starts as a good discussion point for for us to listen to people's conversation, to listen to neighbors talk to each other about why they like something, why they may not like something. And really that's where we begin to see and get a feel for what the project is going to be like. On the left side of the screen, you'll see a lot of the images that people kind of preferred as possible development and how uses along the lake, different aesthetic treatments that they liked. And then on the right side, you'll see kind of what is the least preferred images, which oftentimes just ended up based on density and use. So as part of the public feedback, both in our meetings but also the survey, we put together a few things here for you. One, there's a list of bullet points on what people did want to see, some of their main issues. Obviously, clean water, restaurant, bar, completing the trail system, a marina, improved water quality, improved fishing, deeper water / dredging, bike / kayak rentals, flood control, and safety. And one thing that I want to point out in that wanting to see, since this was initial in the project, was how high dredging was on everybody's list. Because obviously, just based on prior conversations and planning work, everyone thought, well, dredging's the answer to making our lake better, right? So you could see it clearly in the initial survey results. Things that they didn't want to see: too much commercial, further degraded water quality, increase in traffic, poorly maintained roads, more congestion on the lake, housing. Just like on the good side, people didn't want to see a marina because on some people's minds that equals congestion and higher lake use, flooding, habitat destruction, and a resort. So the graphic on the right-hand side is a Wordle, and what that is we'll input how many times we see a word in a survey, and the more times it's there, the bigger the word is. So interestingly enough, one of the biggest things in this Wordle was fishing.
The other important thing to note is what the people wanted from the survey results really kind of matched up with the RFP goals of water quality, fisheries.
So that's, that kind of feedback is very handy. So, I mean, it was good for us to know that the city wasn't necessarily operating from a planning standpoint from a different parameter as to how the community and residents were feeling. So this is just a more impact or more feedback on a map as far as different things, activities that people wanted to see related to public beaches ranking high, parking and access, a marina again, park and play areas, all the way down to different fishing docks. So this is where people put either high uses on there that they currently do or ones that they wanted to see. So continue quantifying that feedback. Here's a good summary of the most desired amenities that were listed to us through our various meetings. The 4 asterisks there that include improved water quality, a restaurant, improved fishing, and public beaches were kind of the top response getters, if you will, the top 4. But you can see all the way down to sports fields there at 38. And then as far as priorities go, again, the top 4 are asterisks. Again, dredging made the list, fish habitat improvement, increased beach and public access to Compesca, and then walking and biking. So over on the right side, you'll see an average of what that priority ranking was per feedback form. Overall, what the median of what that particular element ranked on average, and then, of course, what its mode was when we tossed out the highest score and the lowest score. So it's just a good way for us to be able to quantify where some of those things fall. This is a summary of some of the comment card excerpts we received. I won't go through them in detail, but essentially water quality being a big theme, but also improving fisheries. And I think oftentimes when people see plans like this, they get a little wore down by timeframes, especially when there's prior planning that's occurred. And so a lot of the feedback we received was really trying to find what some of those quick wins are, so that the community can begin to see some progress out there. Then listing again, as far as that feedback, what some potential projects are that we had listed out for them, dredging all the way through wayfinding signage. So we tried not to let even the details fall out of the public planning. So our analysis and recommendations that we put together, Vanessa's going to go through them and really going to focus on water quality here for a moment.
So as it pertains to water quality, the recurring theme that we have seen is dredging and dredging and dredging. So we really wanted to take a good look at how applicable is dredging for Lake Kempesca. Is this a feasible task for the city to take on, to dredge the entire lake, create an island, and what does that look like for Lake Kempesca and for the future water quality for the lake? Right now, Lake Kempesca is hyper-eutrophic due to phosphorus and nitrogen levels, which makes it, in a fisheries world, hard for fish to survive. When you talk water quality and fisheries, the two actually go really closely hand in hand. You need one for the other, and the other helps the other. If you have good fisheries, your water quality is generally good, and vice versa. So the biggest sources for phosphorus loading, or when I talk about the hyper-eutrophic, and the lake, are what is naturally in the lake right now and what is coming into the lake from the Big Sioux River. We do have one inlet and one outlet, and it is the same structure by the former Lunkers, which is now the North Shore, and that poses some constraints on how water flows in and out of our lake system. So how do we properly manage that going forward? As far as water qualities, there have been a slew of studies of water quality on Lake Kempesca. We did review the majority of those, and our water quality was actually done by AE2S. They are a very good hydrological firm that specializes in water quality. In fact, they have a sister company that does dredging. So when we talk about dredging, I feel like our costs are pretty in tune because they do it as part of their company. The biggest thing that we found was that in order to treat the actual lake loading, so we'll talk about the water column, there's alum treatments that are available. It's basically a chemical that you apply to the lake, and it coagulates with the phosphorus, and then that settles and disappears most of those phosphorus levels, allowing for your eutrophication to go down and your water quality to increase. When you do those alum treatments, you actually have to apply it at the water column and the sediment level, because over time, everything at the bottom has already accumulated this phosphorus that has settled. So if you're just treating the water column, you're not getting to the root of the bottom of the sediment, and during turbid times, that sediment will just release more phosphorus. So it's you're kind of chasing your tail. So it's a two-part process where you treat the water and the actual sediment. So that was our main goal of what the actual lake loading is. We aren't discounting dredging. Dredging has an important role in the lake, but we look at it as more of a select location. If you're going to dredge, there should be another reason to it more than just water quality. Your best bang for your buck will actually be the alum treatments, and we'll discuss that a little bit further in a bit. Actually, I want you to go back one more time. And then to address the river loading, Because every time we have a flooding event, no different than this past year, we get a whole lot of nitrogen and we have a whole lot of phosphorus that enters the lake and then it has kind of nowhere to go. There are multiple ways of trying to reduce that lake loading, but to completely reduce it would be to disconnect the inlet outlet from the lake entirely, which is not practical. The Lake Compesca as a whole has very many intrinsic benefits to the city of Watertown for water quantity issues. When we are flooding, the lake absorbs some of that impact for the town. So if we were just to disconnect Lake Compesca, it would have some more severe effects to the town itself. So to try to limit that loading, we are actually suggesting raising the existing weir that is out there approximately 2 feet, so it's at about the 10-year elevation, and that will limit the amount of nutrients that and how often they enter the lake.
Think of it as kind of getting rid of the nuisance flows into the lake as opposed to the big flooding events.
Councilman Billhauer?
I know it's a hypothetical question, well, I guess probably more than that, but, I mean, let's just say that we would totally disconnect the river from the lake. Have we ever tried to measure what that would have done relative to the river levels in some of the higher water years that we've experienced in the past?
Short answer, no. This is so for our scope and our project area, we did not evaluate the downstream effort. We did review previous studies, and I can't say off the top of my head what studies did look at that impact. But permitting-wise, to disconnect, you're changing the whole floodplain throughout town.
It's
So-
pretty hard to model
Yeah.
that.
Not trying to give you a non-answer, but I think based on our experience of permitting such a feat, that based on the history of Compesca and the connection to the Big Sioux River, that's really quite unlikely, even though from a water quality standpoint, it's probably the best answer. And it's a study on top of the study, so we didn't get into that kind of detail.
This slide basically kind of explains how the alum treatment works. Like I said, it's water applied, and then it binds to the phosphorus, and then it coagulates and settles to the bottom. The cost for the water column alum treatment is $8 to $10 million per application, and you apply it on the whole lake. Same for the sediment treatment, except for it's a little bit cheaper for $6 to $8 million. And this is a cyclical process, so it will have to be repeated until you hit your phosphorus levels that you would like to see.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Two questions on this. One, if dredging is something we really want to do and get some of the stuff out of the lake, I assume doesn't this alum add to it? Are we kind of throwing more junk in the lake? That's question one. Question number two is, you look at the past when they try to treat rodents, they bring in some other predator to take care of the rodent, then the predator then becomes the rodent, and it gets to be a vicious cycle. So if we put this in the lake, what's the downside? Does it create other side effects?
Well,
Can we come back to that in a minute?
so this slide basically talks about us wanting to reduce that phosphorus and sediment loading by adjusting the weir flow, and then on top of it, there's a clear-ass system that Roger has been looking at that deals with perpetual use and clearing of the water at the lake. As far as sorry, I thought it was the next slide, but there we go. When we get to the dredging approaches, It is really the cost prohibitive nature of it. So that's when we were talking about selective areas would be ideal. Ideally, dredging by the inlet outlet, not a bad idea. Dredging in certain locations, not a terrible idea, but for bang for your buck is always going to be the alum treatment. As far as side effects, it has been routinely used. It's a chemical process, so I am not aware of any side effects that would come from it. If the biggest cost variable with dredging is not necessarily, well, it's extracting everything, but once you dredge out the material, you have a lot of wet muck. So that actually has to settle, and you have to get all of the water out of it, and then you have to transport it somewhere. So it's the settling process and then the transporting to where is that material actually going to go. If it's within 2 miles of Lake Kempesca, your dredging costs are considerably cheaper. If you are going 15 miles, it's considerably more expensive. One can argue that if you have a lot of ag land, you have a lot of uses for this phosphorus because it's nutrient-rich material that would be beneficial on fields, but you still have to have somebody who want to use it, and it is a lot of material.
Councilman Hoyer?
Well, the other side too, I'm sure it has a smell to it, but my next question with it is, so we kind of know the cost, and we'll see it further in here too, the cost to have someone do the dredging for us. Have we ever looked into how much a dredge itself would cost the city if they wanted to purchase one, if this was an ongoing, very long project?
Yep. I believe the city has looked at that in the past. There has been in South Dakota, West River, they have purchased their own dredging, and they are doing that themselves as a cost-saving measure.
Right, I guess I'm asking it because we saw that figure that was thrown out, I think in the PO, where it was like $1 billion or something. I was just curious if in this study as we
It was
continue here.
500 million to $1 billion, depending upon.
And, right, they chose the higher number to represent it, but I was just curious if we kind of had an idea, ballpark, of what a dredging apparatus would cost, and then what the city would incur if they hired a person to approach this as a full-time job.
So just to keep apples to apples, Councilman, what we did is we just approached the cost from a hired company point of view. That the city purchasing one and using it was something that was discussed, but we did not get into detail specifically about that. Just because I think that's a larger operations conversations, and if that's one of the products from this plan, then we would be excited to support that and to help the city try to figure that out for sure, but it's not part of this report as far as a specific action. And the other thing I'll go back to with the alum itself doesn't add anything to the lake, but obviously the sediment that it's going to bind out of the lake is going to at the bottom. So over time, the alum treatment is going to build up, and the sediment will continue to pile up on the bottom. So while it's a treatment, and it's a good one from our water quality standpoint too, it just like any other chemical treatment is temporary because you're just adding to the problem over the long term of the lake.
Vanessa, you mentioned someone, West River is dredging, purchased a dredge. Who's doing that? Do you know?
It's a little lake outside of Rapid City, and it was actually Game Fish and Parks bought the dredge on behalf of the entity. They are not dealing. It is a smaller dredging system because it is it's a Black Hills Lake, so it has a different series of problems than we have at Lake Kempesca, just due to its natural soil surroundings.
Councilman Bueller?
I'm sure Vanessa would have a lot to do with the size, and if it's mechanical or if it's hydraulic type of dredge, I would imagine too. That would make a big difference in in the cost, but in this plan, I looked through this, and we did talk a little bit about combining maybe some spot type of dredging. Where would be the best places to do that? Where would we be thinking we'd want to spot dredge if we're going to do that?
We do have a couple of spots located further on in the presentation. Basically, inlet outlet would be a great spot. Any place that you would like to put a marina potentially would be a great spot. And then we have some targeted areas for fisheries. When we get into that, we will talk about, we established 2 different zones for fisheries. There's shallow fish loving, or fish that, fish that like shallow water. And then there's fish that like deep water. So creating some of those environments for them would be those select dredging opportunities. Roger did just hand me this. A dredge can range anywhere in cost from $350,000 to $1.5 million.
Councilman Rademski?
If we do this dredging in certain areas, what is the life expectancy that this dredging will last in these certain areas that we choose to do the dredging in? And
Sure. So that's really going to depend upon where you do it. So by the inlet outlet, obviously it's going to fill up quicker based on the actions of the river. So I suspect that dredging would be something that you would do every 5 to 10 years, just to keep a depth in there. When it comes to the fisheries, I would expect that to be in some of the other areas where we would want to do targeted dredging would be in the 20-year range.
Councilman Lallam?
If you were to dredge, how long does it take? I mean, how fast do they move?
It would take all summer.
Could you do the whole lake?
Oh,
No, I'm just
no.
saying if you did the whole lake, I mean, is that like a 10-year process or?
Easily. So in general, you have 6 foot of sediment at the bottom of Lake Compesca right now.
Can I
Go
butt
ahead.
in for just a
Go
second?
ahead, Roger.
Roger Foot with the Watershed Project. Storm Lake, Iowa has been dredging for 20 years at $1 million a year, and they've done 25%. And their lake is a fraction of the size of Compesca.
Is that a hired company?
They actually bought their own dredge, and they hired their own crew, and they're still spending $1 million a year.
I'm just balancing out this 500 million at the lowest, and then if we purchased one for $1 million and we hired someone to do it, what's gonna give us the most bang for our buck if we were to approach something like this?
The biggest obstacle would be where to go with the dredging. And our nearest gravel pit that was even remotely interested is 8 miles away.
Have we approached farmers on it?
Yes, we have.
Not interested?
Not interested.
Okay.
Mostly the sandy, silty loam to spread on their fields, they weren't real interested.
Councilman Roby?
Roger, how did Storm Lake, or how do they justify spending that kind of money? I assume they do it because they think they're getting a return on that investment somehow.
With the smaller size that they have, obviously there's more effect with what they're doing. With the lake, the quarter the size of Compesca, each foot that they take out is a higher percentage of what is there. With Compesca, as large and as windswept as it is, it's going to cost a lot more and take a lot longer.
And I think that feeds into ultimately why we've been talking about some of the alum and raising the inlet outlet a little bit, because in the end, with that kind of dredging investment, you're going to want some return on that investment, right? And unless that changes, you're continually battling the same problem all the time. So I think that's the reason why the report really says dealing with that inlet outlet and connection to the Big Sioux River is the first primary step. Dr. Bryan, our fisheries expert, if it was up to him, he'd make the whole connection go away, period, just from a water quality and fishery standpoint. But we know in the scheme of what this lake does from a flood control standpoint that that's not going to be possible, because there's a lot of other people that would have a say over that disconnection from a regulatory standpoint. So, that prior graphic, the one thing I'll just quick mention, you'll see that the pre-dredge lake depth there of 12 to 15 feet as far as that estimate goes, and the post-dredge lake depth of being 18 to 21 foot deep. So you can see, compared to what Roger was talking about with 1 foot at Clear Lake, in order to get down to some of that original lake bottom, we would have a lot of dredging to do.
We did include this just for a quick schematic. When we were talking about designated fish areas or fish cities, you can dredge to sculpt the bottom of the lake to create little fish cities. So rolling with that topic, if we did some dredging by Sandy Shores in the Bay Area, and then took out about 100 acres to create a nice fish city over there. And that's a prime location. It's not as susceptible to the wind sweep that you would see throughout the lake. We would create an island about the size of that, and that would cost $25 million.
And so really what we're trying to show here, the finished product, is give you an idea the size of an island in the lake, if you will, an underwater island compared to the overall scope of the lake. And you can see it's pretty easy to look at a plan and go, well, how about we build an island here, and how about we put another one here? And you can see it obviously adds up to real dollars. So we just wanted to be able to give an example of that. As Vanessa mentioned, with the targeted dredging, one of the things that we wanted to do as part of this plan is we worked with our fisheries expert to kind of explore different possibilities for fish amenities, and Vanessa had also mentioned these fish cities. So one concept that we developed as part of this plan is to kind of develop what we called a fishing golf course, if you will. It's really more of an interactive thing where these different habitats are developed. They all have a name. Obviously, it's something that's publicly accessible. You can find the spots by your GPS, and some fishermen are just going to know it, but it's a good way to kind of bring branding, if you will, to the lake, and to be able to increase that experience. Another thing that we looked at was the creation of a fishing point there. This is just a schematic to kind of show some of those improvements, along with hypothetical marina. This isn't on any one particular site, but what we wanted to do is really show that both the pier and the marina can be constructed in a way that they'd also create fish habitat, both on the inside and outside, based on the riprap that would go along the outside edge and the vegetation that's on the inside edge. And I'll talk more here in a moment as to why that edge is important. So this kind of shows some generic fish habitats that exist in the lake currently and how we see changing them over time. So on the left side is just a generic representation of 0 to 10 feet deep of currently what a lot of the lake looks like from a habitat point of view. And then all three diagrams around it show different types of habitats that can be built to support fish spawning and growth, both from artificial man-made structures to different types of rock piles. And the size of that rock really affects what you're going to do. The next vignette really shows that even with people's docks, if you look at some of our diagrams in a little bit more detail, I think it was 83% of the lake edge is privately owned right now. Which is a good thing from having the public bought into the project, but from a fish habitat point of view and control that edge, it's a difficult thing because most fish reproduce on that edge, and that transition from shallow to deep is quite important. So even using people's docks and putting artificial structures under those docks can really increase the habitat of the lake, because what you're doing is extending that edge and putting that artificial material out underneath there, so you're really creating more edge along privately owned property. So this is a diagram that really shows another way to increase some of that edge, and that's connecting some of the disconnected wetlands that currently occur along the lake that have been disconnected over its development. Those wetlands and small ponds are quite important from a fish spawning point of view. And again, if we are able to connect some of those disconnected areas that are currently shown in yellow there and improve some of those wetlands, we can really increase the edge. Yes, sir.
How does reconnecting impact invasive species with Compesca? Would it risk increasing it, or is it going to still be about the same of where it is already?
We wouldn't expect that to change any,
Okay.
because the main threat's really the lake itself and people bringing boats in.
From a dredging aspect, are there any federal grants available for projects like this?
Very few. How is that for an answer? Very few. There's always a grant for something, but specifically for dredging,
And the reason why there's very few is, frankly, this is not a Midwestern problem that's unique to Lake Compesca. All lakes and water bodies located in agricultural areas like ours are experiencing this same problem. So there's really just not a lot there for it.
Additionally, talking on the wetland connections, I'm sorry, Reed, you can ask your question.
Well, you might end up answering it
Okay.
before I ask it.
The huge goal of fisheries is basically to have 20% shoreline improvements. That's a magical percentage where fish start spawning more, fish habitats take off. And so in order to attain that 20% shoreline improvement is why we want to incorporate the wetlands. Also, the wetlands do an amazing job of just naturally clarifying our water. And it's an easy way of attaining that, since all of Lake Compesca is basically already developed. Yes, Reed.
How would the reconnection work? How would you actually get it reconnected? Are you talking
Yeah, a lot of
tunnel?
yeah.
Yep. So to answer your question, Councilman, this is kind of a couple different schematics. In some existing areas, we would be able to do under road or under trail pass-through that actually could be accessed by a non-motorized boat, whether it's a kayak or canoe. But other ones, because of elevation changes, they would literally be just RCP or precast culverts that would connect the two water bodies, and then those pipe sections are then have rock put in them and in different things to be able to attract the fish to go in and out of them and use them. So
Most of these at one point did already have a connection to the lake. They have either silted in or just not been maintained over the period of time. So it is just reestablishing the connection.
And I think there's even a condition of one kind of private one that exists on the lake, and our hope would be to make all those connections public so they can be a publicly maintained utility.
Is there a method, sorry to jump in here, is there a method to put those inlets or feeding zones in without removing road? Other than the ones that maybe we can unsilt? I'm just thinking of traffic flow if we go through all those and rip out the road, since some of those areas are kind of blocked off if you take off that one road.
There are methods. I wouldn't the one that I'm thinking of, some of the connections are in disrepair, so
Right.
they need to be fixed properly. There are relining opportunities out there, but the goal of it to create something that will be pretty maintenance free for a while, your best installation will actually be to replace. When we get into the implementation of it, you'll see that we've tried to coordinate a lot of these projects with projects that you're already doing, whether it might not be under engineering, it might be under parks, it might be through another project, but there's opportunities for cost sharing and fixing some of the different areas.
Right. The concern was more so just
the road.
residents out at the lake and the
Unfortunately,
challenge they'd face.
I mean, depending upon I think it's better if we make some of those areas, if they can be accessed by canoe or boat, that makes them better, right? Because it brings them within the public eyesight.
Right.
And if we're going to do that, unfortunately, it's a major enough construction project that leaving the road untouched would be highly unlikely.
Okay.
So another one of the elements that we looked at in conjunction with this plan was the overall planning and zoning around the lake currently, because obviously land use is a big part of the overall development of the lake and its water quality. So we get into some summaries here. Our 7 primary goals from a planning and zoning standpoint to manage the growth, prevent, lessen traffic congestion, separate/buffer incompatible land uses, preserve neighborhood character, quality of life, protect property values, set expectations and requirements for new development, and identify needed or desired services and amenities. So in front of this is a graphic portraying our kind of a few things that exist right now, and it really highlights on the private land use that I was talking before right now. So a lot of that orange around the perimeter of the lake is all, for the most part, private. Well, it's all privately owned. The green is the public parks that exist currently, and then the disconnected and connected wetlands. So from a land use and zoning recommendations point of view, we've laid that a lot. One of my business partners, Chris Shires, who's the former planner of West Des Moines, Iowa, went through a lot of this, presented this information to your planning and zoning subcommittee here 2 weeks ago. And so was really able to get into depth on a lot of this, but this is our overall recommendations that you see summarized in front of you. So we didn't want to leave this item untouched as part of our planning work. So this shows a future land use map that we've been developing over the last 12 months that we've been working on this, working in conjunction with the COG and the city to be able to identify what we feel is an appropriate future land use map. So,
Councilman Bill Hauer has a question.
yes,
Can I back you up
Yeah.
to that previous slide, John?
Yeah.
I know this is going to come up later on in our conversation at our council meeting. Do you want to address, or can somebody explain? I'm looking at the triangle-shaped piece of property up on the top. That's going to be an item of discussion tonight. Vanessa, I've talked to you. Heath, I've included you in an email. I know in one of your earlier versions of your earlier iterations of your plan, that particular area up there, as well as the one by Sailboat Landing, which we acted on just a few months ago, that had a different recommended use in earlier iterations. Can we get an explanation as to why that recommended use has changed per this map that we're seeing now?
Sure. I can give you a little bit of detail on that and in general, and typically it's part of the process, Councilman. Oftentimes when we begin to generate our first draft of these land use maps, it's based on the process that we've been through up to that point. So a lot of our initial planning and zoning and mapping that we put together was based on public feedback that we received, that we had gone through up to that point. But then obviously we work for multiple people on a project like this. We're surveying the public to get what they want. We're also working with the COG and existing zoning guidelines, which we begin to incorporate into that mapping. And then over time, obviously, we work with the city as well in the planning and zoning department and begin to integrate what they want to see as well. So oftentimes as we go through this process, it's something that, just like the dredging and some of our other recommendations change over time, the future land use map is just another example of that. So I wouldn't say that it was something right or wrong. It just continued to change as we developed more input and got more feedback.
I'm just kind of wondering here too, now that we brought up looking at it. So maybe it's just the neighborhood, because I see neighborhood highway commercial, but looking on that south tip of the lake there, right in the pinch, kind of off 60th Street, southwest, the one that's actually touching the lake, is that being recommended more so as like a neighborhood or as highway commercial?
Are you talking about?
Stony Point.
Right up in there.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
yeah. So right now, that's all being mixed use, which is exactly what it says. It's mixed use, so it's a combination of commercial and residential.
Right.
So that it often, the goal being that it always has activity as opposed to just seasonal life.
And, Mayor, if I may, to John's point and to Councilman Hoyer's question, I think one point of clarity that I'd maybe make here is the HC nomenclature that the consultant has used isn't definitively equated to our C3 highway commercial zoning district. Their HC that they're showing, although highway commercial is one of them, it's also considered neighborhood commercial. So I just want to point that out. It can be neighborhood commercial or highway commercial in accordance with their legend. I know it gets a little bit confusing because when we see HC, due to our zoning conventions, we're used to thinking only highway commercial. But in this case, for the terms of this study, and correct me if I'm wrong, John or Vanessa, but it could be either or, neighborhood or highway commercial.
Thank you.
You're
That's the
correct.
clarification I was looking for.
Along the same lines, it's also important to note that currently, if you're single-family residential in town and you're single-family residential at the lake, your zoning and your regulations are exactly the same. We do recommend, as a part of the study, that you come up with a lake residential and in-town residential, because there are two different beasts. Same for your commercial. We recommend that you come up with a lake commercial and an in-town commercial, because there are commercial activities that do benefit and support lake life. And that's how you want to see your community and your lake grow.
So to kind of end and summarize here, we really have a 3-phase implementation plan to wrap up the document. Obviously, we've gone through a number of water quality phase interventions here that we've broke out for you. Fishing habitat improvement and stocking. We have talked to the GF&P, and obviously, based on their adjacent Lake Pelican facilities, they're quite interested in continue to upgrade to these fishing facilities, and would be, at the time we talked to them, willing to do stocking as part of your plan. So from a first phase improvements point of view, typically as planners, when we look at something, we look at a first phase being 1 to 5 years. So you can see the costs that we have associated broke out there, and what they break out into. Obviously, as Vanessa just said, with some of the zoning and lake-specific regulations, that's something that we see you working on over the next year immediately, just to be able to, because development's not going to stop. So you're going to want to get all the ducks in a row, so to speak, for that area. And then focusing on water quality and fish habitat. Ultimately, depending upon the decisions that are made through there, we have a first phase total of just over $18.5 million. A second phase, continuing to do water quality projects and fish habitat projects, 5 to 10 years is about $800,000. And then lastly, a 10 to 15 year plan would be another investment of about $16.5 million again. So this is not, it's our goal to create a roadmap. Obviously, there's a number of discussions that need to continue to happen, but we at least want to be able to give you an idea of what the possible investment is on this lake in order to do the things that we've discussed over the last year. So.
If you go through the cost implementation, obviously the most expensive items on it are the alum treatments. These are repetitive, and they're only as good as your next flooding event. So if you would have done an alum treatment a year ago with the flooding that we've had over the last summer, you would probably still have to do an alum treatment. So there are risks involved, and there would be that same risk with the dredging. But just so you have your eyes wide open when you are planning. So we do have that repeating about every 10 years, because even this past year seemed like if you track our flooding events, it seems like an ample time to plan on doing those. Ideally, the cost of the treatments would go down because your water quality is getting better, but that is unknown at this time. The other large improvements, a lot of them are fish passages and reconnecting the wetlands. We did lump those into your bridge inspections. I'm not presenting on that tonight because I think your council agenda is long enough, but we'll talk about them in January. But trying to capitalize on some of the known structures that we know that you need to replace, and it's already on your radar and your capital improvement plan, and just making sure that when we design the replacement for that, we are taking into effect the positive benefits for the lake at the same time.
Great, thank you. Do we have any questions, Councilman Hoyleen?
Thank you. I had, speaking of the flooding events that you just referenced, you were saying that you could not close off Compesca because of the negative effects it might have on exacerbating the floods somewhere else. Are you talking like the city of Watertown, places downriver, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Councilman Hoyer?
So I can toss out on that a little bit too. If you've ever gotten adventurous with a kayak, you can take that little waterway that's up by North Shore and just ride that sucker all the way into town, and you'll see that all that water does flow directly into the community. So if you did shut that off, it's exactly where it's going to go through. It goes through a bunch of farmland, and then it exits like right by where you pass the Big Sioux River on the way out. So
I've actually done that twice. One
There
time
you
I
go.
took a wrong turn and ended up at Dakota Sioux Casino.
that's how you do it. That's right. Glad I'm not alone.
Councilman Albertson?
Vanessa, when you did your study, is there anything about springs in that in Lake Compesca that if that were ever a point to close off some of that water coming in, if we would dredge the springs that probably are covered? And I've heard there are springs, maybe several,
Yes.
that used to fill that lake. And is that something we could think about or should think about?
Our aquifers are actually alive and well. So while we have a sole source from the Big Sioux that contributes to our water levels, we are constantly inundated with our groundwater and the aquifers underneath the lake. So, you know, we've talked a lot about dredging, and you bring up actually a pretty good point. We could close it off, try to drain the lake, and just mechanically remove sediment too, but that's not going to help you with your tourism for a short period of time. But the aquifers are alive and well. I think Roger could probably speak more to that.
Sorry, Councilman, this is one of my favorite subjects. How long would you like me to go? Lake Compesca sits directly in aquifer material. We can go into the history of that if you like, but to physically drain the lake at the water levels that we are in the ground right now would be impossible. Even blocking it off and starting to pump, there's enough water coming in fast enough through the ground to keep up with any pumping system. Records from the old water treatment plant, they could kick on all the pumps at full blast and only lower the level of the lake 2 inches during the dry years. And there's enough recharge from the ground to keep up with that. It's a great idea. We thought of it, but it's not physically possible.
But the sediment's not affecting that recharge. So.
We have a study that was done by the Lake Compesca Water Project District, which looked at the springs, and the best location to do dredging would be on the, upstream side where the springs are more prevalent and lower hanging fruit, so to speak, less sediment, and get more bang for the buck if we did selective dredging. Other questions? Councilman Hoyer?
So just kind of wondering too, again, on the selective dredging, just to clarify, we would absolutely have to do those weird modifications essentially so that we don't get more, because the concern of course is that if you do the dredging, how long is it going to be before it fills back in? Because if we don't address the root problem, we're just buying time, right?
According to the Corps of Engineers' last sediment survey, they did core samples, and their rate of sedimentation in the lake is about 1/10 of an inch per year. So if you took out, you can do the math from there.
Well, I guess, and then with the hope, because I mean that's actually not as intense in some ways as I thought. So if we did the selective dredging, would that give us basically an opportunity to maybe increase some of those more commercial opportunities with fishing and such, so that maybe we can start generating a little more funding to it, so that we could possibly start tackling some of these bigger issues around it?
That is definitely a viable option. The cost of raising the weir is actually not exorbitant at all. There's still studies that need to be done, inundation studies, to make sure that we are not negatively impacting anybody. We feel pretty safe recommending that you put it at the 10-year flow of elevation. Originally, it was designed to be at that elevation, and then last minute it got changed. So to 2 foot lower than it is. So I'll let the mayor.
The DENR made us lower it. We didn't want to, because it would artificially change the ordinary high water level at the lake, which was based upon control downstream, setting the lake level. I will have to say, though, the ordinary high water level is affected by a man-made structure. So the DENR knows that, they recognize that. I suppose the attitudes could possibly change through time, and I do think it's worthwhile to try and pursue that and see what it would take to be able to change that, because I agree completely that we would get the most bang for the buck in doing that, and we were bitterly disappointed to be told we had to lower that weir 2 feet. Anyone else? All right, we do have a motion on the table to recommend approval of the Lake Kempesca Master Plan, and we'll look for action. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Appreciate it.
Okay, we just approved it, now what? I mean, I've seen a lot of studies in my time in the council that we accept them and they sit on a shelf. I mean, where do we go from here?
The council will adopt it formally, and we will incorporate it into the revision of our comprehensive plan for our community. And hopefully, we will be using this for years to come as a guide on how to spend money and how much to budget. How much do we need to set aside to do certain things? So, you're welcome. Is there any old business? See none. Any new business? None? Let's see, do we have time? We really don't have time for an executive session tonight pursuant to SDCL 1-25-2. So I'll look for a motion to adjourn. So moved. I think I got a motion by Holene and a second by Bueller. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. We're adjourned, and we will reconvene in a few minutes for the council meeting at 5:30.